It's strange how life can fool you into thinking everything's fine until it isn't. If you'd asked me about my marriage a year ago, I'd have told you I was the luckiest man alive. Camille, my wife, was smart, gorgeous, and had a way of lighting up any room she walked into. She was my dream girl, or so I thought. We lived in a sleek modern home just outside Portland, a place that felt like the culmination of all my hard work. I'd built my career at Cyber Sentinel from the ground up, becoming one of the youngest chief architects in the field. I had no illusions about the intensity of my job, but I loved it. It gave me purpose, and I thought it gave us both a secure future. Looking back, the cracks were always there. Camille loved the spotlight, the admiration. She had this magnetism that drew people in, and honestly, I used to admire that about her. She could walk into a room and command attention effortlessly. But as time went on, I began to feel like I was just part of her scenery, a supporting actor in the grand movie of her life. I didn't think much of it. I chalked it up to her outgoing personality and told myself it didn't matter because I loved her. But love has a way of blinding you to the truth, and in my case, it blinded me completely. The moment everything changed was so mundane, so ordinary, that it caught me completely off guard. One morning, I was sitting in my home office reviewing some complex code for a new breach detection system. My phone buzzed, a notification from the security system I'd installed in our house. It was supposed to be a precaution, just another tool in my arsenal to protect the things that mattered to me. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Just Camille and her mom, Vivian, in the kitchen. They were laughing, chatting quietly, like they always did. I almost dismissed it until a phrase caught my attention. "It's Zane's baby." I froze. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Zane? The personal trainer? The guy with the perpetual smirk and a brain seemingly made of protein shakes? I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. Camille giggled, her voice dripping with contempt. "Noah's so clueless, he won't see it coming. He's too obsessed with his computers to notice anything outside his little world." Vivian chimed in, her voice sharp and calculating. "Good. He'll hand over half his fortune in the divorce before he even knows what hit him." It felt like the ground beneath me disappeared. My stomach churned, and my hands trembled as I rewound the footage, playing it again and again, hoping I'd misheard. But there it was, plain as day. Betrayal, woven into the fabric of their conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen. My mind went blank, my body cold. This wasn't a bad dream. This was my life, unraveling before my eyes. What hit me hardest wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer ease with which they planned to dismantle everything I'd worked for. My love for Camille, my trust in her, even the family I thought we were building together. It was all just a pawn in their twisted game. I shut my laptop, my hands balled into fists. Anger simmered beneath the surface, but I didn't let it boil over. Not yet. Years of working in cybersecurity had taught me one crucial lesson. When someone tries to break into your system, you don't panic. You analyze, strategize, and wait for the perfect moment to strike back. For now, I had to play the role of the oblivious husband. Camille and Vivian thought they'd outsmarted me, that I'd fall right into their trap. They didn't realize I was already building a trap of my own. That night, I sat across from Camille at the dinner table. She looked radiant as ever, her auburn hair catching the soft glow of the chandelier. She smiled at me, that same disarming smile that used to melt away all my worries. But now it felt like a mask, a facade hiding the rot underneath. "How's work?" she asked casually, her fork idly pushing a piece of asparagus across her plate. "Busy," I replied, keeping my tone light. I forced a smile. You know how it is. Lots of moving pieces. If she noticed anything different about me, she didn't show it. Her gaze was serene, her posture relaxed. To her, I was still the clueless husband, the perfect mark in her twisted scheme. As we talked, I watched her closely, picking up on things I hadn't noticed before. The way she glanced at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The faint smirk that lingered on her lips when she texted, like she was sharing some private joke. I didn't ask who she was talking to. I already knew. The hardest part was keeping my emotions in check. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to confront her, to demand answers, to let her know I wasn't the fool she thought I was. But I swallowed the urge. I couldn't afford to tip my hand, not yet. After dinner, Camille retreated to the living room, curling up on the couch with a glass of wine and a book. I lingered in the kitchen, pretending to clean up. In reality, I was watching her through the reflection in the window above the sink. She looked so at peace, so utterly unbothered. I couldn't reconcile the woman I married with the one sitting in front of me. Camille used to be my confidant, the person I trusted most in the world. Now, she was a stranger, a beautiful, treacherous stranger. Later that night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with 100 different scenarios, each one more vindictive than the last. But anger wouldn't solve anything. I needed a plan, something that would make them feel the full weight of their betrayal. The first step was gathering evidence. Camille and Vivian thought they were clever, but they underestimated me. I'd spent years outsmarting some of the most sophisticated hackers in the world. Tracking their every move would be child's play. I started small, installing additional surveillance devices around the house. Hidden cameras, microphones, anything that could capture their conversations. I also cloned Camille's phone, giving me full access to her texts, calls, and emails. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. The texts between Camille and Zane were nauseatingly smug. They referred to me as the robot and mocked my long hours at work. Zane, in his infinite wisdom, suggested they just ghost me after the baby was born. Camille, ever the tactician, reminded him that they needed my money. Then there were the emails from Vivian. She'd been in touch with a lawyer, laying the groundwork for a divorce that would leave me with nothing. She even joked about how easy it would be to manipulate the legal system in their favor. Every message, every recording, every shred of evidence I collected was like a dagger to the heart. But with each discovery, my resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. By the end of the week, I had enough dirt to bury them both. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed to make sure every loose end was tied up, every contingency accounted for. Camille and Vivian thought they were running the show, but they didn't realize they were just pawns in my game. The storm was coming, and I was going to make sure they felt every drop of its fury. Equipment he thinks we'd love for the home gym. I raised an eyebrow, forcing my expression to stay neutral. Zane? The trainer? Why's he bringing you gym equipment? Oh, he's just being helpful, she replied, her tone breezy. He's been great about keeping me motivated lately. I nodded, suppressing the urge to say something cutting. Well, let me know when he's coming. I'll make myself scarce so you two can chat uninterrupted. Camille smiled, clearly pleased by what she thought was my cluelessness. By now, I'd tracked every interaction she had with Zane. Their secret meetups at hotels, the texts dripping with fake promises of a future together, even the occasional exchange of photos. It was all logged, time-stamped, and backed up in multiple secure locations. But the real prize came one afternoon when Vivian, unaware of the hidden cameras in the kitchen, made a phone call to a contact in a legal office. Camille's husband? He's loaded, she bragged. By the time I'm done, we'll have his house, his bank accounts, and probably his retirement fund. The idiot won't know what hit him. Her voice dripped with arrogance, and I couldn't help but smirk as I replayed the recording. It wasn't enough to expose them, though. I needed to go further. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their own greed and betrayal, to crumble under the consequences of their actions. First, I fortified my financial defenses. I worked with my lawyer and a trusted financial advisor to secure my assets in a way that would leave them untouchable. Camille and Vivian thought they'd hit the jackpot, but by the time they made their move, the bank vault would be empty. Next, I turned my attention to Zane. Camille might have been the mastermind, but Zane wasn't blameless. I discovered he had a history of scamming his clients, selling them overpriced supplements and pushing unnecessary personal training packages. With a bit of digging, I found the paper trail, a string of complaints, shady business dealings, and enough evidence to make him squirm. I planned my moves like a chess match, each piece carefully positioned for maximum impact. When the time came, everything would fall into place. The hardest part was keeping up appearances. At home, I played the dutiful husband, smiling through dinners and nodding along to Camille's anecdotes about her busy days. At work, I poured myself into my projects, channeling my frustration into code and algorithms. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering why. Why had Camille done this? Why had Vivian encouraged it? Why hadn't I seen the signs sooner? But those questions didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was what I did next. By the end of the month, the trap was ready. I'd gathered enough evidence to not only protect myself but also ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. Now, all I had to do was wait for the right moment to spring it. Camille and Vivian thought they were the ones in control, but they didn't realize the game had changed. And when it was over, they wouldn't just lose, they'd have nothing left to take. The opportunity to make my first move came sooner than I expected. Zane showed up on Saturday afternoon, dressed like he was auditioning for a fitness commercial. Tight tank top, designer sneakers, and that irritating grin plastered across his face. He sauntered into my home like he owned the place, dragging in a sleek new set of dumbbells and resistance bands. Camille greeted him with a hug that lingered just a little too long. My stomach churned, but I kept my face a mask of polite indifference. "Zane," I said, extending a hand. "Thanks for bringing this over. Nice of you to think about Camille's workouts." "Of course, man," he said, clasping my hand with just a touch too much force. "Gotta keep her in top shape, right?" I forced a laugh. "Absolutely. Let me help you set it up." The three of us headed down to the home gym, where I played the role of the affable host while Zane preened and flexed, showing Camille how to use each piece of equipment. I could see the glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking, the small smirks and stolen looks. It was infuriating, but also useful. Once Zane had finished his show and tell, he excused himself to take a quick call and headed outside. Camille followed soon after, claiming she needed to ask him about something. I waited a few minutes before slipping into my office and pulling up the live feed from the hidden camera in the backyard. There they were, standing too close, their voices low but clear. "I hate sneaking around like this," Zane said, his tone carrying a mix of frustration and entitlement. "When are we making this official?" "Soon," Camille replied, her voice hushed but firm. "You know we have to time it right. Vivian's handling the details, and once the paperwork's filed, we'll have everything." "Yeah, well, I'm tired of waiting," Zane muttered, crossing his arms. "Your husband's an idiot, but even idiots can get suspicious." "He's not suspicious," Camille said quickly. "Trust me, he doesn't have a clue." I muted the audio, unable to stomach any more. Their arrogance was staggering, but it only solidified my resolve. They thought I was blind, that I was a joke. Perfect. Let them think that. When they came back inside, I acted like nothing was amiss. Camille smiled at me, that same confident smirk, and I returned it with one of my own. "Everything good?" I asked. "Just fine," she said, her tone breezy. "Great," I replied. "Zane, you staying for dinner?" Zane hesitated, glancing at Camille. "Nah, I've got plans. But thanks for the offer, man." "Anytime," I said, walking him to the door. As he left, I clapped him on the shoulder. "Take care, buddy." The moment the door closed, I felt a small, grim satisfaction. Zane had no idea that every word he'd spoken was now recorded, saved, and ready to be used against him. That night, as Camille scrolled through her phone in bed, I lay beside her, pretending to read. My mind was racing, plotting my next move. The cracks in their facade were starting to show, and I intended to exploit every single one. By the time Camille turned off her lamp and drifted to sleep, I'd already decided my next step. It was time to turn their overconfidence into their downfall. It was time to set the first domino in motion. Camille and Zane's arrogance had blinded them, and Vivian's overconfidence had made her reckless. I needed to shake their foundations, make them question each other, and introduce a level of paranoia that would work to my advantage. The morning after Zane's visit, I began by casually bringing him up over breakfast. Camille was scrolling through her phone, sipping on her usual latte, when I dropped the bait. "Zane's an interesting guy," I said, feigning nonchalance as I spread butter on my toast. She didn't look up. "Your trainer," I clarified. "He's got, let's call it a big personality." She chuckled, still glued to her phone. "Yeah, he's a character." "Didn't realize he was so chatty," I added, keeping my tone light. "We talked a bit yesterday while you were upstairs. He mentioned some of his other clients. Seems like he's got his hands full." That made her pause. She set her phone down, her smile thinning. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing bad," I said quickly, waving it off. "Just sounded like he's juggling a lot of relationships, you know? Kind of gave me the impression he's one of those all things to all people types." Her eyes narrowed, but she forced a laugh. "He's just friendly. That's part of his job." "Of course," I agreed, nodding. "But you might want to keep an eye on him. People like that can be slippery." I could see the flicker of doubt cross her face. The first seed planted. Camille prided herself on being in control, and the idea that Zane might not be as loyal as she thought would eat at her. Next, I turned my attention to Vivian. That evening, while Camille was out running errands, I used my access to her phone to send an anonymous text to Vivian. "I hope you know Zane's not as trustworthy as you think. Ask him about his other plans. He's keeping secrets." It was vague enough to be intriguing but specific enough to unsettle her. I knew Vivian well enough to predict her reaction. She'd confront Zane directly, and their conversation would only add fuel to the fire of mistrust I was building. The next few days were a masterclass in subtle manipulation. I dropped small comments to Camille here and there, nothing overt, but just enough to keep her on edge. At the same time, I monitored Vivian's texts and calls, watching as she tried to get a straight answer from Zane about his loyalty. And Zane? He played his part beautifully. Defensive and evasive, he made all the wrong moves, further feeding the suspicion brewing between him and Vivian. One evening, I caught Camille staring at her phone, her brow furrowed in thought. "Everything okay?" I asked, slipping into my role as the oblivious husband. She quickly forced a smile. "Yeah, just work stuff. Anything I can help with?" I offered. "No," she said quickly, standing and heading to the kitchen. "It's nothing." But I knew better. The cracks were widening, and it was only a matter of time before they started pointing fingers at each other. For now, I played the waiting game, biding my time as the seeds of doubt took root. Camille, Vivian, and Zane had no idea that I wasn't just watching. I was orchestrating. And soon, their fragile alliance would come crashing down. The tension in the house grew palpable, even without any direct confrontations. Camille became more withdrawn, spending hours on her phone, her expression alternating between frustration and worry. Vivian's calls came more frequently, and I could hear the clipped, irritated tone in Camille's voice every time they spoke. Meanwhile, I kept close tabs on Zane through the clone phone. His messages to Camille were becoming more erratic, desperate attempts to reassure her while subtly blaming Vivian for their setbacks. At the same time, he was messaging Vivian, trying to stay in her good graces by sowing doubts about Camille's commitment to their plan. It was almost poetic, watching them dismantle their own alliance. By the weekend, the cracks I'd carefully cultivated finally gave way. I was in my office when Camille burst through the door, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. "Noah, I need your advice," she said, her tone strained but trying to sound casual. I set down my pen, feigning surprise. "Of course. What's going on?" "It's just Vivian," she said, folding her arms. "She's been acting weird lately, asking all these unnecessary questions about our finances, even questioning Zane's intentions." I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words. "Weird how?" She hinted that Zane might not be trustworthy," Camille said reluctantly, her eyes darting away. "But that doesn't make sense. Why would she say that?" I suppressed the urge to smile. Instead, I shrugged. "Maybe she's just being cautious. You know how protective she can be." Camille huffed, pacing the room. "It's more than that. She practically accused him of playing me. Can you believe that?" I leaned back in my chair, giving her a look of mock concern. "That's a serious accusation. Do you think there's any truth to it?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. "No. Zane wouldn't. I mean, of course not." But the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. She was already questioning him, and all it took was a little nudge to push her over the edge. "Well," I said, keeping my tone measured, "it couldn't hurt to keep your eyes open. Just in case." That evening, I saw my efforts bear fruit. Camille spent hours texting Zane, her messages laced with subtle accusations. Zane, predictably, reacted defensively, calling her paranoid and blaming Vivian for stirring up drama. Their exchanges grew more heated until Camille finally stopped responding altogether. The next morning, it was Vivian's turn. I sent another anonymous message, this time hinting that Camille was reconsidering their partnership. Camille's talking to Zane about pulling out of the plan. She doesn't trust you anymore. Vivian wasted no time confronting Camille. Their heated arguments spilled into the living room, where I conveniently overheard enough to piece together the gist of their conversation. You're letting him manipulate you, Vivian snapped. And you're trying to turn me against him, Camille shot back. Why? So you can control everything. Control everything? I'm trying to protect you from making a fool of yourself, Vivian retorted. The shouting match ended with Camille storming off, slamming the door to our bedroom. Vivian stood in the middle of the living room, fuming, before grabbing her purse and leaving without a word. That night, Camille barely spoke to me, and when she did, her answers were curt and distant. I played the concerned husband, giving her space while secretly reveling in the chaos. The alliance that had once seemed unshakable was now in shambles. They'd turned on each other, each one convinced the other was out to sabotage them. And as they scrambled to regain control, I prepared for the next phase of my plan. They thought they could use me, play me like a pawn in their little game. But they'd forgotten one crucial thing about pawns: they can become queens when they reach the other side of the board. With Camille and Vivian's alliance crumbling, I turned my attention to Zane. His arrogance and recklessness made him the weakest link, and it was time to exploit that. I started with his reputation. Over the weeks, I'd quietly collected evidence of his shady dealings. Complaints from clients, falsified fitness certifications, and records of questionable transactions. It was all tied together in a neat little file, ready to send to the appropriate authorities and a few influential contacts in the fitness community. But before I pulled the trigger, I decided to test just how fragile his loyalty really was. Using an anonymous account, I sent Zane a message. Camille's using you. You're just a means to an end. Ask her why she's been meeting with her lawyer behind your back. It didn't take long for him to respond. His messages to Camille became increasingly frantic, demanding to know what she was hiding. She, in turn, lashed out, accusing him of doubting her commitment. By the time they met in person 2 days later, the tension between them was palpable. I knew this because I was watching through a hidden camera I'd discreetly placed in Camille's car. You think I'm lying to you? Camille hissed, her voice low but venomous. You've been shady, Camille, Zane shot back. First your mom starts planting doubts, and now you're meeting with lawyers? What the hell is going on? I'm meeting with lawyers because I have a lot more to lose than you do, she snapped. Do you think I enjoy dealing with this? You're supposed to have my back. Maybe I would if I didn't feel like a backup plan, he retorted. Their argument spiraled from there, devolving into a blame game that left neither of them unscathed. By the time Zane stormed out of the car, slamming the door behind him, it was clear their relationship was hanging by a thread. But I wasn't done with him yet. The next day, I sent the file I'd compiled to the fitness company that employed him, along with a few key gym owners in the area. Within hours, Zane's name was being dragged through the mud in local fitness circles. Complaints about his unprofessional behavior and shady dealings began surfacing online, and his reputation took a nosedive. The cherry on top came when Camille called me that evening, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. Did you hear what happened to Zane? She demanded. Hear what? I asked, feigning ignorance. He's being investigated for fraud. Apparently, someone's been spreading lies about him, and now his gym's considering firing him. I kept my tone even, pretending to be sympathetic. That's terrible. Do you think someone's targeting him? I don't know, she muttered. But it's suspicious timing, don't you think? I didn't respond, letting the silence stretch until she changed the subject. By the end of the week, Zane was out of a job and scrambling to salvage what was left of his reputation. His frantic calls to Camille went unanswered, and his attempts to reach Vivian were met with cold indifference. He was isolated, cornered, and exactly where I wanted him. One by one, the pillars of their scheme were falling, and soon, there would be nothing left to support the house of lies they'd built. I could feel the momentum shifting, the pieces of my plan aligning perfectly. The endgame was in sight, and I was ready to make my next move. Zane's downfall had left Camille reeling. She spent her days pacing the house, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as she fired off terse messages to Vivian. Their calls, once conspiratorial and gleeful, had devolved into tense exchanges filled with blame and doubt. I watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction, playing my role as the oblivious husband to perfection. I offered her space when she seemed stressed, listened politely when she ranted, and kept a supportive facade while the walls of her world came crashing down. The next step was to tighten the noose around Camille and Vivian. Using the evidence I'd collected, I tipped off a financial investigator, an old college friend who owed me a favor. Within days, Vivian's suspicious dealings with shady contacts were flagged, and the investigation put her on edge. Meanwhile, I prepared for the coup de grace. One evening, while Camille sat in the living room, I joined her with 2 glasses of wine. She looked surprised but didn't refuse. "You've been stressed lately," I said, handing her a glass. She forced a smile, taking a sip. "Just a lot on my mind. Anything I can help with?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, it's fine. Just work stuff." "Camille," I said softly, leaning forward. "You know you can tell me anything, right? Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The next day, I sprang my trap. I told Camille I'd be working late and left the house, but instead of going to the office, I parked a few blocks away and logged into the live feed from the hidden cameras. Sure enough, Vivian arrived not long after. Their conversation was everything I'd hoped for. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Camille said, her voice trembling. "You need to pull yourself together," Vivian snapped. "We're too far in to back out now." "Zane's a liability," Camille muttered. "He's been calling me non-stop, blaming me for everything. What if he exposes us?" "He won't," Vivian said firmly. "He knows he'll go down with us if he tries anything." I recorded every word, every damning detail. It was the final piece of the puzzle. When I returned home that evening, Camille was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. She looked up, startled, then nodded. "Yeah, fine." But I knew better. The weight of their unraveling scheme was crushing her, and she was barely holding it together. The time had come to deliver the killing blow. The following morning, I sent copies of the recordings to my lawyer and prepared for a dramatic reveal. Camille and Vivian thought they'd covered their tracks, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The trap was set, and all that was left was to watch it spring shut. I woke early the next morning, the air in the house thick with tension. Camille was already up, pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. She spoke in hurried, hushed tones, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone trying desperately to regain control. "Don't call me again, Zane," she hissed, her back turned to the doorway. "This is your fault, and you're not dragging me down with you." Her words lingered in the air as I made my way into the kitchen, deliberately making enough noise to announce my presence. Camille quickly hung up and turned, plastering on a brittle smile. "Morning," she said, her voice too bright. "Morning," I replied casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said, waving it off. "Just work stuff." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, though I could see the cracks in her facade. Her eyes darted toward her phone on the counter, as if she expected it to explode at any moment. I decided to push her, just a little. "You've been pretty busy lately. Everything okay?" "Of course," she said quickly, picking up her mug. "Just a lot going on. You know how it is." "Right," I said, meeting her gaze. "Well, let me know if there's anything I can do." She gave a strained smile before retreating to the bedroom, her steps quick and uneven. As the day wore on, Camille's anxiety became impossible to ignore. She jumped every time her phone buzzed, snapping at me over minor things and retreating to her room for hours at a time. Vivian didn't come by, which only added to the tension. It was clear their alliance was on shaky ground, and Camille's growing paranoia was starting to erode what little composure she had left. By evening, I decided it was time to escalate. "Let's have dinner together," I suggested, catching her off guard as she emerged from the bedroom. "It's been a while since we had a quiet night at home." She hesitated, her expression wary, but ultimately nodded. "Sure. Why not?" I made her favorite: seared salmon with garlic mashed potatoes and a side of roasted asparagus. Camille sat at the table, poking at her food more than eating it, while I watched her carefully, waiting for the right moment. "You've seemed a little stressed lately," I said casually, breaking the silence. "Is everything okay with your mom?" She stiffened, her fork clinking against the plate. "What do you mean?" "Just that you've been spending a lot of time with her," I said, feigning innocence. "I figured something might be going on." "No, nothing's going on," she said quickly, too quickly. "She's just dealing with some personal stuff." "Ah," I said, nodding slowly. "Well, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know." Camille barely managed a nod before standing abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not feeling great. I think I'll head to bed early." She left without another word, leaving her half-eaten dinner on the table. I watched her go, a faint smirk playing at the corners of my mouth. The tension was reaching its breaking point, and Camille was unraveling faster than I'd anticipated. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed one final push, something to tip her over the edge and expose the full extent of her betrayal. The next morning, I got my chance. Vivian showed up unannounced, her expression tight with barely concealed frustration. I greeted her at the door, keeping my tone polite. "Vivian. Always a pleasure." "Noah," she said curtly, brushing past me. "Is Camille home?" "She's in the kitchen," I said, gesturing toward the back of the house. I followed her at a distance, slipping into my office as she stormed into the kitchen. Through the live feed from the hidden camera, I watched their argument unfold. "What the hell is going on?" Vivian demanded, slamming her purse onto the counter. Camille looked up from her coffee, startled. "What are you talking about?" "Zane's been calling me non-stop, saying you've cut him off," Vivian said, her voice rising. "He's threatening to go public if we don't give him what he's owed." "I told him to back off," Camille snapped. "He's a liability, and I'm not risking everything because he can't keep his mouth shut." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any idea how bad this looks? If he turns on us, it's over." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before involving him in the first place." Camille shot back. Their shouting match continued, each blaming the other for the unraveling of their plan. I recorded every word, carefully cataloging their confessions and accusations. When Vivian finally stormed out, slamming the door behind her, Camille slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She looked defeated, the weight of her own schemes crushing her under its enormity. I watched her for a moment, my heart pounding with anticipation. The storm was reaching its peak, and soon, everything they'd built would come crashing down. Tomorrow, I would unleash the full extent of my evidence. Tomorrow, their carefully constructed lies would be exposed for everyone to see. And tomorrow, Camille would finally understand the price of betrayal. The morning arrived with an unusual stillness in the house. Camille barely left the bedroom, claiming she had a headache. Vivian hadn't shown up since their explosive argument the day before. The air felt charged, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. I spent the early hours preparing, going over the evidence one last time to ensure every detail was accounted for. The surveillance recordings, the intercepted texts, the financial documents, each piece fit together perfectly, forming an airtight case. By noon, I made my move. I called Camille into the living room, keeping my tone calm but firm. "We need to talk." She appeared in the doorway, her expression wary. "About what?" "About everything," I said, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated before sinking into the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "What's going on, Noah?" I picked up the remote and turned on the TV, where I'd queued up the first surveillance recording. The screen came to life with footage of Camille and Vivian in the kitchen, their voices clear and damning. "It's Zane's baby," Camille's voice echoed through the room. Her face turned pale, her eyes darting toward the screen in disbelief. What is this?" "Keep watching," I said, my voice steady. The footage played on, capturing every word of their plot to manipulate me, their mocking laughter at my supposed cluelessness. When the recording ended, I turned to Camille, her face now ashen with shock. "You've been spying on me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You've been lying to me," I replied, standing over her. "And not just lying, scheming." plotting to take everything I've worked for and destroy the life I thought we were building together. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. I hit play on the next recording, this one showing her heated argument with Vivian. Their accusations flew back and forth, each one exposing more of their twisted scheme. Camille's head dropped into her hands as the recording ended. "Noah, please." "Please what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Please forgive you? Please forget that you've been carrying on with Zane behind my back? That you planned to leave me with nothing?" Tears streamed down her face as she stammered, "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I never meant to hurt you." "Don't insult me," I said sharply. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care. But now you'll face the consequences." I pulled out a folder containing the evidence I'd compiled, screenshots of texts, copies of emails, financial transactions, and even the paternity results proving the baby wasn't mine. "This," I said, tossing the folder onto the coffee table, "is going straight to my lawyer. And this," I pointed to the recording still cued on the TV, "is going to the authorities." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. "Noah, please, we can fix this," she begged. "We can start over." "There's no starting over, Camille," I said coldly. "You destroyed any chance of that the moment you decided to betray me." The front door opened, and Vivian walked in, her face hardening as she took in the scene. "What's going on here?" I didn't bother hiding my smirk. "Perfect timing. Vivian, why don't you take a seat? You'll want to see this." I played the recordings again, this time for both of them. Vivian's calm facade cracked as the evidence piled up, her protests growing more frantic with each passing minute. "You can't prove any of this," she said finally, her voice trembling. I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "All I can. And I will." The color drained from her face as I explained the next steps. The recordings would be shared with my lawyer, the authorities, and even a few local media outlets to ensure their actions became public knowledge. Camille buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing through the room. Vivian sat in stunned silence, her usual composure shattered. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. The power they thought they had over me was gone, replaced by the undeniable weight of their guilt. I stood, gathering the folder and turning toward the door. "I'm filing for divorce, Camille. And trust me, you'll be lucky to walk away with anything." "Noah, wait," she called after me, but I didn't stop. I walked out of the house, leaving behind the wreckage of our marriage and the people who had tried to destroy me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. They had underestimated me. But now, they'd finally learned just how wrong they were. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal battles, public scandal, and personal reflection. The evidence I had amassed didn't just secure my divorce. It ensured Camille and Vivian faced the consequences of their actions in every facet of their lives. The court ruled decisively in my favor. The recordings, financial documents, and paternity test left no room for doubt. Camille walked away with nothing, and Vivian's fraudulent dealings became a matter for law enforcement. Zane, on the other hand, found himself blacklisted from every reputable gym in the city. His reputation was in tatters, and last I heard, he'd moved out of state, trying to start over somewhere no one knew his name. As for Camille, her fall from grace was as swift as it was brutal. Friends she'd once charmed turned their backs on her, unwilling to be associated with someone whose betrayal had become a local headline. She reached out to me once, just once, a tearful email filled with apologies and promises that she would change. I deleted it without reading past the first sentence. Vivian didn't fare much better. Her schemes caught up with her, and her socialite facade crumbled under the weight of investigations. Her connections couldn't save her, and she disappeared from the public eye. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding, not just my home, but myself. I remodeled the house, stripping it of every trace of Camille and transforming it into a space that felt like mine again. Work became a refuge, a place where I could channel my energy into creating, innovating, and pushing boundaries. But it wasn't all about work. I started reconnecting with old friends, spending weekends hiking the trails outside Portland, and rediscovering the joy of simply living. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I met someone. Her name was Mia, a a software engineer with a sharp wit and a laugh that was impossible to ignore. We met at a tech conference, bonding over a shared love of problem-solving and bad coffee. Mia was nothing like Camille, and that was exactly what I needed. She was kind, genuine, and unpretentious, someone who valued honesty above all else. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sun set over the trees, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about the past? About what happened?" "Sometimes," I admitted, taking a sip of my drink. "But not with regret. It taught me a lot. About people, about myself. It made me stronger." She smiled, her hand finding mine. "Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you made it through. And I'm glad I met you." I squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The betrayal I had endured could have broken me, but instead, it became the catalyst for a new beginning. A life free from lies, filled with possibility, and built on a foundation of trust. Camille and Vivian had underestimated me. They'd thought they could destroy me, take everything I had. But in the end, their betrayal had only made me stronger. The world had tried to break me, but I was still standing. And this time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving.